Today, we are diving headfirst into a really unsettling world. One where personal experience, cutting-edge neuroscience, and declassified military documents all collide. We're going to be looking at the phenomenon of targeted individuals. These are people who are convinced they're under attack from unseen technological forces.
You know, to really get a handle on this, we've got to start by listening to the people right at the center of it all. This voice, it represents a whole global community, and it's really a cry for help against something they feel is just tearing them apart from the inside. And listen to this. Another person points to actual physical evidence. We're talking burns, rashes, things they argue you just can't write off as psychological. And these aren't just one-off stories. People from Singapore to Sweden are reporting shockingly similar experiences.
I mean, these stories are intense, and they bring up this huge and frankly kind of terrifying question. In a world that is just flooded with invisible signals, where do you even draw the line between a technological attack and a paranoid delusion? That's the core mystery we're going to try and unravel here.
All right, so first things first, let's start with the human side of this. Before we get into any of the science or the military theory, we really need to understand what these individuals say they're going through. So what does it actually mean to be a targeted individual, or a TI? Well, at its heart, it's this unshakable belief that you're the subject of this complex, relentless campaign of torture. It's way more than just feeling like you're being watched. It's a deep conviction that some kind of unseen weapon is causing you real physical and psychological harm. Okay, so let's tackle the most obvious explanation first, the one that takes us right into the world of psychology. Is it possible this is all just some kind of widespread shared delusion?
And this is where it gets, well, really unsettling. When you put the claims of TI side by side with the classic symptoms of psychosis, the overlap is just undeniable. Hearing voices, that lines up perfectly with auditory hallucinations. That feeling of burning skin, it's eerily similar to something called formication. That's the medical term for the sensation of insects crawling on you. And the central belief of being stalked and targeted, well, that is the literal definition of paranoia.
And look, we know for a fact that the mind is powerful enough to create physical symptoms. It's called the nocebo effect. Think of it as the evil twin of the placebo. It's proof that if you believe something strongly enough, it can cause real physical changes in your body. There's this wild story about a 6th grade teacher who, just as an experiment, told his class to spend every day for a week just thinking about having a canker sore. And by the end of that week, a quarter of the kids in the class had actually developed one. The mind is that powerful. But here's where the TIs flip this whole thing on its head. They make a really compelling argument. What if we have the cause and effect completely backwards? Many of them say they were perfectly healthy before all this started, with symptoms often kicking in during their 40s or even later, which is way older than the typical age for schizophrenia to show up. So they ask, couldn't a real external form of torture actually be causing all the psychological distress instead of the other way around? And that question, what if the brain is just reacting to something real and external? Well, that leads us straight into our next area, neuroscience, and the really fascinating work of a guy named Dr. Michael Pershing.
Now, Dr. Persinger is famous for inventing something called the God helmet, which could stimulate the brain and actually make people feel like they were having a mystical experience. His whole starting point is materialistic. He argues that every single thing we experience, love, fear, spirituality, you name it, is just a product of physical activity happening inside our brain.
But here's the thing. Persinger's own framework runs into this really interesting problem, near-death experiences. You have people who report having these incredibly vivid conscious experiences while their cortical brain activity, the stuff an EEG machine measures, is totally flat. So if experience is just brain activity, how in the world is that possible?
Persinger's response to this is just brilliant. He says an EEG only measures the very, very surface of what the brain is doing. He compares it to a swimming pool that's 100 meters deep. A flat EEG, he says, just means the top meter of water is perfectly still. It tells you absolutely nothing about the other 99 meters of potential activity churning away down below.
And this opens the door to a pretty radical idea, one that Persinger himself eventually embraced. What if the brain isn't just a generator of our consciousness? What if it's also a highly sensitive receiver, like a biological transceiver? What if its incredibly complex structure is actually tuned to pick up on information that's already in the environment? things like cosmic rays or radio waves that we don't even consciously realize are there. So this idea of the brain as a receiver, well, it takes on a much darker tone when you start looking at it through the lens of military theory. As the title of this section, which is taken from a U.S. Army paper, suggests, the mind has no firewall.
Back in 1998, the U.S. Army's Foreign Military Studies Office published this analysis of new Russian military ideas. The paper itself was titled "The Mind Has No Firewall," and it kicks off with this quote that'll just send a shiver down your spine. It was exploring a whole new kind of information warfare, one that doesn't target computers or satellites, but the data processing system of the human body itself.
And the paper goes on to detail this whole range of theoretical psych weapons that Russian strategists were dreaming up. I mean, just imagine a psychotropic generator that sends signals through the power lines and pipes into your home, or something called acoustic psychocorrection that uses sound you can't even hear to beam commands straight into your skull. The list even gets into researching telepathy for covert operations. It's wild stuff. So, the really big idea here, the game changer, is that military thinkers started to see a person not as a self-contained being, but as an open system. They saw a human as being vulnerable, as having their mental state directly changed by outside forces, whether that's acoustic, electromagnetic, or something else entirely. Okay, and this is the moment where we pull all three of these different threads, the personal stories, the neuroscience, and the military theory, and we weave them all together. So let's just lay it all out. On one hand, you have the sufferer, the targeted individual who is reporting very real pain from a source they can't see. Then you have the scientist, like Dr. Persinger, who theorizes that our brain is basically a complex transceiver able to pick up on external signals. And finally, you have the soldier, or at least the military theorist, who sees the human mind as the ultimate new target in information warfare. You've got three totally separate fields, all pointing to this idea that the human mind is vulnerable to outside forces.
And just so we're absolutely clear, this isn't just some crazy theory cooked up in a think tank. This stuff is real. The U.S. Department of Defense has a working directed energy weapon. It's called the active denial system. It shoots an invisible beam that creates this unbearable heating sensation on your skin, making you want to run away. The technology to physically affect a human body with invisible energy, it exists. It is real. And it has been deployed. Which really just leaves us with this one final provocative thought. We're living in a literal ocean of invisible signals. We've got military theory that's conceptualized weapons to take advantage of that, and we've got neuroscience that suggests our brains are basically built to be sensitive receivers. In a world like that, the line between an external attack and an internal delusion gets terrifyingly blurry. So the real question is, what is the firewall for your mind?